The morning sun spilled across the narrow street of San Felipe, turning the damp cobblestones into a mirror of gold. Lina Santos stood by the rusted gate of the small house she had shared with her husband for 3 years. Her suitcase, scuffed and trembling on uneven ground, looked heavier than it was, because it carried the weight of her decision. Inside the house, Rico watched her in silence, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes hollow from nights without sleep. He wanted to ask her to stay, but every word felt useless against the invisible wall that had grown between them. "Just a few months," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "I'll find work in Manila. We need this." The lie slipped easily from her tongue, practiced and clean. Rico nodded, pretending to believe her. But something in her voice, something too calm, told him she was already gone long before she stepped out that door. A tricycle sputtered to a stop outside, its driver glancing between them awkwardly, sensing the tension that hung like smoke. Lina lifted her suitcase. Rico stepped forward, his hand reaching out instinctively, but she moved past him. Their shoulders brushed. It was the smallest touch, but it carried years of unspoken resentment, love, and regret. "Take care," he murmured. She paused, her back to him. "You too," she said, before climbing into the tricycle. The engine roared, drowning out everything else. Rico stood at the gate until the sound faded into the distance, until the silence became unbearable. Inside the empty house, he noticed the little things she left behind: a comb near the mirror, her favorite mug still half full of cold coffee, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the curtains. He walked through each room like a stranger. The walls seemed smaller, the air heavier. Every trace of her presence felt like a wound he couldn't stop reopening. Lina, meanwhile, kept her eye. She was on the road as the tricycle sped toward the main highway. The sea shimmered to her left, endless and calm, mocking the storm that brewed inside her. She told herself she wasn't running away. She was moving forward. But deep down, she knew this wasn't escape. It was betrayal painted as freedom. At the terminal, she waited for the bus to Manila, her fingers trembling around her ticket. She thought of Rico, how he used to make her laugh, how his hands once felt like safety. But love, she decided, couldn't fill an empty stomach or fix a broken dream. When the bus arrived, she climbed aboard without looking back. As the vehicle climbed the winding hills, the town disappeared behind a curtain of mist. Lina pressed her forehead against the window and whispered, almost to herself, "This is the last time." But the words didn't sound convincing. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice warned her, some goodbyes don't end. They only wait to return. Back in San Felipe, Rico sat outside as night fell, staring at the flickering streetlight that hummed above the gate she once opened every morning. He told himself she'd call. He told himself she'd come back. But as the crickets grew louder and the stars hid behind clouds, he realized the truth. Lina hadn't just left him. She had left the life they built, the version of herself that once loved him. And as the first bus carrying her toward the city vanished into the darkness, both of them felt the same cold thought neither dared to say aloud. This farewell wasn't final. The bus rattled through Manila's crowded streets, a blur of honking cars, street vendors, and flashing billboards. For Lina Santos, the noise was dizzying, the air thick with gasoline and promise. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the city rise like a glittering beast, alive and hungry. Somewhere in that chaos waited the man who had changed everything, Victor Almeida, a name that had begun as a whisper and now pulsed like a heartbeat in her mind. They had met months earlier when Victor visited the small resort where she worked as a receptionist. He'd been charming, confident, older, but magnetic in a way that made her forget the world. He'd spoken to her as if she mattered, as if he saw beyond her faded uniform and tired smile. That night, when he slipped her his business card, he had already written her future on its smooth white surface. When Lena stepped off the bus, a black car waited near the terminal. A driver approached, holding a small sign with her name. She hesitated for only a second before getting in. The leather seats smelled of cologne and wealth. As the car moved through the city, her reflection in the tinted window looked different, like someone rehearsing how to be someone else. Victor greeted her at the steps of a mansion in Quezon City. The gates were tall, painted gold, guarded by men who bowed slightly as she passed. He kissed her hand and smiled the way only a man who owned everything could. Inside, the air was cool and expensive. Chandeliers hung like glass rain, and the marble floor gleamed beneath her trembling shoes. She wanted to feel proud, but the grandeur pressed down on her like a warning. "You'll never have to struggle again," Victor told her that night as they dined in silence. "With me, you'll learn what it means to live." His voice was soft, but carried the weight of command. When she looked at him, she saw both salvation and danger. The world he offered was intoxicating. Meals served by servants, dresses delivered in boxes tied with silk, a room that smelled of roses and loneliness. In quiet moments, Lena thought of Rico's small kitchen, the sound of rain hitting the tin roof, the simplicity of 2 cups of coffee shared before dawn. The memories came uninvited, like ghosts tapping at locked windows. She tried to push them away, convincing herself that this life, this mansion, was the reward she deserved for surviving everything she left behind. But Victor's affection came in waves, warm one moment, cold the next. He wanted to know where she went, who called, what she dreamed about. When she laughed too long at something on TV, his eyes narrowed. When she mentioned home, he changed the subject. Still, Lena stayed. She told herself she owed it to her new beginning, that love sometimes looked like control when viewed too closely. Every night she stood on the balcony, staring at the skyline, watching the city pulse beneath her feet. The lights reminded her of the sea, beautiful, endless, and deceptive. Then one evening, as she unpacked a box of dresses Victor had ordered for her, she found a message on her phone. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. "I forgive you. Rico." Her breath caught. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. She deleted the message instantly, but the tremor in her fingers remained. That night, when Victor asked why she looked pale, she forced a smile and said she was tired. But she knew something had changed. The world she'd entered wasn't built on love. It was built on power. And now, somewhere miles away, the past she tried to bury had just begun to dig itself free. The news of Lena's departure spread through San Felipe faster than the sea wind that swept the narrow streets each morning. By the time the church bells rang for Sunday Mass, everyone knew Lena Santos had left her husband for a rich man from Manila. The story grew with each retelling, twisted by envy and gossip, until it no longer resembled the truth. Rico became the center of every whisper. Women outside the sari-sari store pretended not to look at him when he passed, their murmurs rising behind his back. Men at the small bar by the pier shook their heads in pity. Some said he should have seen it coming. Others said no man deserved such humiliation. Rico heard them all. He didn't react. He just drank. Each evening he sat outside his house, staring at the fading horizon, a half-empty bottle beside him. The ocean's rhythm used to calm him. Now it only reminded him of the night Lena left, her figure disappearing into the waves of headlights. The sound of tricycles passing still made him turn his head, foolishly expecting her to return, carrying that same old suitcase. Maritz, his childhood friend and neighbor, often came by to check on him. She brought food he rarely touched, speaking softly as if afraid her words might break him further. "You have to eat, Rico. Life doesn't stop because someone walks away," she told him one night. He gave a tired smile. It does, when the one who walked away was your life. She didn't know what to say. She'd seen love fail before, but never like this. Never so sudden, so public, so cruel. When she left, she whispered a prayer for him under her breath, though she wasn't sure who she was praying for anymore. Rico's healing, or Lena's forgiveness. Days turned into weeks. Rico stopped working at the fishing dock. He stopped talking to most people, too. At night, when the power flickered and the village went dark, he'd sit by the window and scroll through old photos on his phone. Lena laughing, her hair caught by the wind, her arm around his shoulders. He wondered if she ever looked at their pictures anymore. He wondered if she remembered what they promised each other before the world taught them to lie. Then came the rumor that broke him completely. A tricycle driver from town claimed he saw Lena getting out of a black car near the city mall, wearing gold jewelry and holding a man's hand. She looked happy, the driver said, like a movie star. Rico didn't say anything, but something inside him cracked, clean and deep. That night, he smashed the empty bottles against the wall until his hands bled. Marites rushed in and found him slumped on the floor, breathing hard, eyes empty. She wanted to call someone, but he stopped her. "Don't," he said. "She made her choice. I'll make mine." The next morning, he packed a small bag, filled it with a few clothes, and tucked Lena's old photo inside. He stood for a long time at the doorway, looking at the house they'd once built together with borrowed money and shared dreams. Then he locked it and walked toward the main road, not knowing exactly where he was going, only that he couldn't stay in a place haunted by her shadow. The villagers watched silently as he left, their whispers following him like ghosts. Some said he was going to Manila to find her. Others said he'd never return. For the first time in weeks, Rico felt something close to peace. He didn't know what awaited him in the city, only that answers lived there, and maybe revenge too. The gates of the Almeida estate rose before Lena like the entrance to another world. Gold bars gleamed beneath the afternoon sun, guarded by men in crisp uniforms. The car slowed, and the heavy iron doors swung open without a sound, revealing a long driveway lined with palm trees and silence. To anyone else, it might have looked like paradise. To Lena, it felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Victor met her at the entrance, dressed in a tailored suit that looked effortless. He smiled, but his eyes carried the cold precision of a man used to control. "Welcome home," he said, and though his tone was gentle, the words felt final, like a gate closing behind her. Inside, marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and wax, expensive and sterile. Servants moved quietly, their footsteps barely touching the ground. Lena's room was on the second floor, with a balcony that overlooked the gardens. From up there, she could see the high walls surrounding the property, too tall for comfort. That night, they dined in a hall so vast that their voices echoed. Victor spoke about his business ventures, about friends in government, about the people who envied his success. Lena listened, nodding, trying to understand this man who had pulled her out of her old life. When she reached for her wineglass, she noticed how his gaze followed her hand. There was something possessive in it, a quiet reminder that even her smallest movement was under his watch. After dinner, she walked alone through the mansion's dim hallways. Her reflection followed her in every polished surface, too dressed, too distant from the girl who once sold seashell bracelets by the shore. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and her own heartbeat. She stopped before a painting of a woman in pearls, the woman's eyes luminous, sad despite the smile painted on her lips. Lena stared for a long moment, wondering if she was the only one who saw the sorrow in that smile. In the days that followed, the mansion became her world. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. Victor's moods shifted like tides, kind one hour, unpredictable the next. When he was happy, he showered her with gifts, diamond earrings, silk dresses, a car she never asked for. When anger struck, his silence could last for days, heavy and sharp. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer in her room, Lena's phone buzzed. She froze when she saw the name. Rico. Her breath caught as she read the message. "I forgive you." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She deleted it quickly, terrified that Victor might see. But it was too late. When she turned, Victor was standing in the doorway. "Who was that?" he asked softly. "No one," she lied, forcing a smile. His gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer before he nodded and walked away. But his footsteps echoed up the stairs long after he was gone. That night, Lena lay awake, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the balcony doors. She thought of Rico's voice, of the forgiveness she didn't deserve. Outside, the lightning flickered across the high walls, and she realized how deep she had wandered into this gilded prison. Down the hall, Victor stood by the window, watching her door. In his hand, her deleted message glowed faintly on her unlocked phone. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble floor of the Almeida mansion, turning everything gold except the expression on Lena's face. She stood before the mirror, her fingers trembling as she traced the faint bruise blooming on her arm. It was small, easily hidden beneath the sleeve of her silk robe, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. The memory of Victor's voice from the night before still echoed, low, measured, and dangerous. He hadn't shouted. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to crush her. It had started with a question. He'd asked about the message she received. When she hesitated, his hand tightened around her wrist just long enough to leave a mark, then released as if nothing had happened. "Don't lie to me, Lena," he had said, his tone calm, his smile unnervingly gentle. She promised it was nothing. He kissed her forehead and left the room, leaving behind a silence so heavy she could hardly breathe. Now, as she adjusted the silk sleeve to cover the bruise, Lena felt the world around her shrink. The mansion no longer seemed vast. It felt like a cage, one gilded with chandeliers and guarded smiles. Servants greeted her with forced politeness, their eyes darting away too quickly, as if they knew what she refused to say aloud. Days passed in a haze of routine. Breakfasts served on porcelain plates, long hours spent waiting for Victor to return, and endless nights pretending everything was fine. She learned to read his moods, the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight change in tone before anger surfaced. Some evenings, he would bring her gifts, whispering that he loved her, that she was special. Other nights, he would disappear without explanation, leaving her alone in a house that never slept. One afternoon, Lena wandered into the garden to find Sophia, one of the maids, trimming roses near the fountain. The woman looked up and smiled faintly, though her eyes carried the quiet knowing of someone who had seen too much. "Madam, be careful with those," Sophia said, nodding toward the thorns. "Even the most beautiful flowers can draw blood." Lena smiled weakly, but her throat tightened. Sophia's words lingered in her mind long after she went inside. Later, when the two crossed paths again in the hallway, Sophia spoke softly, almost as if afraid the walls might hear. "You should leave, ma'am, while you still can." Lena froze. "Why would you say that?" Sophia looked around before whispering, "Because you're not the first woman to wear his gifts." Then she walked away, her footsteps fading into the distance. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the silk robe draped across the chair. It shimmered in the dim light, delicate and perfect, like the life Victor had promised her. But underneath, her skin ached with the truth. She wasn't loved. She was owned. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Victor came home late, smelling of smoke and whiskey. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, eyes cold and sharp, before disappearing into his study. When the door slammed, Lena flinched and pressed her palm to her bruised arm. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. Not loud enough to be heard, but strong enough to change her forever. For the first time, Lena didn't cry. She just stared at the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, like tears she no longer had the strength to shed. She knew then that she had to find a way out. But before she could, someone from her past was already on his way back into her world. Rain still whispered against the mansion's windows when Lena awoke. The storm had passed, but its scent lingered, that mix of wet earth and something electric, like the air before a confession. She rose slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion, the bruise on her arm now fading to a sickly yellow. Victor was gone. His absence, once a relief, now felt like an omen. She stepped into the hallway, hearing only the muffled rhythm of her own footsteps. The house was too quiet. No servants moved, no phones rang, no distant laughter from the staff quarters. She walked toward the main doors and froze. The gate outside was open. That never happened. Not here. When she reached the foyer, Sophia appeared, her expression pale. "Madam, someone is here to see you." Before Lena could ask who, the echo of boots filled the marble hall. A man stood at the doorway, his coat dripping rainwater, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. For a moment, Lena couldn't breathe. The air left her lungs in a single whisper. "Ethan?" He looked older than she remembered. The same steady eyes, the same quiet strength, but weathered, shaped by years of pain she hadn't been there to soothe. Her husband, the man she thought she had buried in her past. "Hello, Lena," he said softly, removing his hat. "You look different." She wanted to speak, to explain, but words stumbled and died before reaching her lips. He stepped closer, scanning the lavish room, the chandelier, the grand staircase, the cold perfection of a life that didn't belong to her. His gaze finally met hers again, and she saw it. The question, the disappointment, and something else beneath it. Understanding. "I thought you were gone," she managed to whisper. "I was," he said simply, "until I saw your name in the papers, Victor Almeida's wife." The words tasted bitter. I had to see for myself. She turned away, clutching the edge of the table to steady herself. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan. It's not safe." "Not safe for who?" His voice hardened. "For me, or for you?" Before she could answer, the sound of a car engine rumbled in the driveway. Victor was home. Panic sliced through her chest. "You have to leave," she urged. "If he finds you here—" But Ethan didn't move. He straightened, his eyes narrowing. "Let him. I'm not leaving you again." The front doors opened with a sharp crack, and Victor stepped inside, his smile too calm to be real. "Well," he said, brushing rain from his jacket, "what a pleasant surprise." His gaze shifted from Ethan to Lena, lingering long enough to make her flinch. "I didn't realize we were entertaining guests." Ethan held his ground. "Just came to see how my wife's been living." The air thickened. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victor's expression softened, almost amused. "Your wife?" He chuckled under his breath. "I think you're mistaken." Lena stood between them, her pulse pounding so loud she could barely hear. She saw the danger in Victor's eyes, that calm, practiced cruelty. She also saw the defiance in Ethan's, the kind she had once fallen in love with. And in that instant, she knew something irreversible had begun. Victor turned away, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Dinner will be ready soon, he said. I'd hate for anyone to lose their appetite. Ethan watched him disappear down the hall, then looked at Lena with a warning that chilled her to the bone. He won't stop now, he said, and neither will I. Outside, thunder murmured again, softer this time, but it carried a promise, the kind that meant the past wasn't finished with them yet. The invitation arrived the next morning, printed on ivory paper sealed with a gold crest. An evening of celebration, it read, to honor the success of Almeida Industries. Lena stared at the embossed lettering, her hands trembling slightly. The irony was cruel. A celebration, the perfect disguise for danger. Victor's tone at breakfast was unusually warm, almost tender. He spoke of the party as if it were nothing more than a business gathering, insisting Lena wear the sapphire gown he had bought for her last spring. You'll look magnificent, he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, but she could feel the threat beneath it. Every kindness from him carried a warning. Ethan's arrival the day before had shattered the fragile illusion of peace. He hadn't left, despite her pleas. She didn't know where he was staying, but she felt his presence lingering around the estate like a shadow. That morning, when she walked through the garden, she found a single folded note tucked beneath a rose bush. I won't let him hurt you again. I'll be there. As dusk approached, the mansion came alive. Servants rushed through the halls arranging crystal glasses, polishing silver trays, and setting candles that flickered against the grand mirrors. Music drifted from the ballroom, a waltz both elegant and mournful. Guests arrived in sleek cars that lined the driveway, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. Lena descended the staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. The gown shimmered under the chandelier, hiding the faint scars beneath its silk. Victor greeted her at the bottom, his hand extended, his smile fixed. You see, he murmured, leading her toward the ballroom. The world adores us. She smiled because she had to. Cameras flashed, toasts were made, and the night blurred into a glittering performance. Yet behind every glass of champagne and polite compliment, she felt eyes on her, watching, waiting. Then she saw him. Ethan stood near the far column, dressed in a dark suit, blending effortlessly among the crowd. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in that glance, everything else vanished. He nodded once, a silent promise. Victor followed her gaze and frowned. Do you know that man? Lena's heart stuttered. He's one of your guests, isn't he? She replied, keeping her voice steady. Victor studied her face for a long moment before smiling again. Perhaps. The evening unfolded with unbearable tension. Every conversation felt scripted, every laugh hollow. Ethan moved discreetly, his presence unnoticed by most, but Lena could feel him nearby. The quiet anchor in a sea of deceit. Near midnight, Victor took the stage to deliver a speech. His voice carried across the room, confident and commanding. Tonight, he declared, we celebrate the future, built on loyalty, power, and truth. He lifted his glass, his eyes locking on Lena. And may we never forget those who pretend to be something they are not. The guests applauded, unaware of the venom beneath his words. Lena's hands trembled as she held her drink. She could see the suspicion darkening in his gaze. He knew. Somehow, he knew Ethan was there. As the music resumed, Victor leaned close to her ear, his whisper barely audible. After the guests leave, we'll talk. Her blood turned to ice. Ethan's eyes followed her from across the room, reading the fear in her expression. He began moving through the crowd, steady, deliberate. Outside, thunder rolled again, faint but growing nearer. A storm returning to claim what it had been denied. And in that moment, Lena understood. The night of the party would not end in celebration. It would end in revelation. The storm that had rumbled on the horizon during the party finally broke that night. Rain hammered against the windows of the mansion, drowning out the fading laughter of guests as they departed. Lena stood at the top of the staircase, her reflection ghost-like in the polished marble floor below. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. "After the guests leave, we'll talk." She knew what that meant. She retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. The silence pressed down like a weight, broken only by the thunder outside. Her pulse quickened as she lifted the floorboard near the bed, a hiding place she'd carved weeks ago when the bruises first began. From beneath it, she pulled out a small envelope containing her passport, a few pesos, and the note Ethan had left in the garden. The handwriting was steady, strong. "When you're ready, meet me by the pier after midnight. Don't look back." She pressed the paper to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. This was her chance. Maybe her only one. But every corner of the mansion felt alive, filled with the possibility of discovery. She knew Victor's guards were still stationed at the gates, and that his surveillance cameras watched every hall. If she was to escape, she had to be smarter, quieter, faster than she had ever been. A soft knock startled her. "Lena?" It was Rosa, the housemaid, whispering urgently. "He's looking for you." Lena's heart lurched. "Tell him I'm resting," she murmured. Rosa hesitated, then slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. "This came earlier, from your friend." And before Lena could reply, she was gone. Unfolding it, Lena saw a map, hand-drawn, showing a hidden path through the garden that led to the rear gate, where one of the cameras had been disabled. Ethan's handwriting marked an X at the pier. Beneath it, 2 words, "Trust me." For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then she began to move. She changed out of the gown, replacing it with dark clothes, her movements deliberate and silent. Every zipper felt too loud, every breath a risk. She took the small bag from under the bed and glanced once more around the room that had become both her prison and her sanctuary. Downstairs, the faint sound of Victor's voice carried from his study. He was on the phone. Angry. Impatient. "No, find out who that man was," he barked. "I don't pay you to miss details." She slipped into the hallway, barefoot on cold marble. The storm masked her footsteps. Lightning flared through the windows, illuminating the portraits on the walls, Victor's ancestors staring down with silent judgment. At the end of the corridor, Rosa waited, trembling. "Go," she whispered. "I'll say you're asleep." Lena nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you." Then she was outside, running through the rain-soaked garden, her heart pounding in rhythm with the thunder. The path wound through the trees, slippery with mud, but she didn't stop. Each step felt like defiance, like reclaiming something she had lost long ago. When she reached the back gate, she hesitated. Beyond it lay freedom, or danger. She turned the latch, and the old metal creaked softly. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She froze, glancing back into the shadows. Nothing. Only the rain. She pushed the gate open and stepped through, clutching her bag, her pulse echoing in her ears. The road to the pier stretched before her, dark and slick with rain. But as she started down the narrow path, headlights flickered in the distance. Someone was coming. Fast. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Lena reached the edge of the river. The air was thick with mist, the moon veiled behind drifting clouds. She could hear the water's slow churn, the rhythmic slap of waves against the wooden posts of the old pier. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt alive. The headlights she'd seen on the road moments earlier had vanished, but the dread they brought lingered. She tightened her grip on the small bag clutched to her chest. Ethan wasn't there yet. Or maybe he was hiding, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. The trees swayed violently in the wind, their branches creaking like old bones. She stepped closer to the water's edge, scanning the fog. "Ethan?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. At first, there was nothing. Then, through the curtain of mist, a figure appeared. He was soaked, his shirt clinging to him, his face pale beneath the faint glow of the street lamp. "Lena," he called softly. "You made it." Relief washed over her, almost enough to bring tears. She ran toward him, the muddy ground sucking at her shoes. "We have to go, now. He knows," she said breathlessly. "He knows you were at the party." Ethan took her hands, his eyes darting toward the road. "I parked beyond the bridge. There's a path through the reeds, but we can't stay here long." She nodded, clinging to his arm as they started along the embankment. The water shimmered silver beneath the lightning flashes. The world felt suspended, every moment fragile, borrowed. Then came the sound of an engine, a low growl growing louder. Headlights sliced through the fog. Lena's blood ran cold. Ethan turned sharply. "Run!" They sprinted along the riverbank, the mud slick beneath their feet. The car skidded to a stop behind them, doors slamming open. Victor's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Lena!" She froze. The command in his tone had always held her in place, even now. But Ethan grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. "Keep going!" A gunshot cracked the air. The sound echoed across the water. Birds erupted from the reeds, their cries lost in the storm. Lena screamed as Ethan stumbled, his grip faltering. His knees hit the mud first, then his body. "Ethan!" She dropped beside him, pressing her trembling hands to his chest. Warm blood seeped through her fingers. His eyes flickered, unfocused, but he managed a faint smile. "Keep running," he whispered. Another shot. The river seemed to tremble. She looked up to see Victor emerging from the mist, his face contorted, rain glistening on his skin. "I gave you everything," he shouted. "And you repay me with this?" Lena rose slowly, her body shaking, her mind caught between terror and rage. "You gave me a cage," she hissed. Victor raised the gun again, his hand steady. "Then I'll set you free." But before he could fire, Ethan's hand shot out, gripping Victor's leg. The distraction lasted a second, but it was enough. Lena lunged. She shoved Victor backward, the two of them stumbling toward the edge. The gun went off again, but neither could tell who it struck. They crashed into the water. The river swallowed them, dark and merciless. The gun slipped from Victor's hand, spinning away into the current. Under the surface, Lena thrashed, clawing, her lungs burning. She broke free, gasping for air as Victor's form vanished beneath the swirling black water. When the river finally calmed, only Lena remained, soaked, trembling, staring at the ripples where the man she once loved had disappeared. And behind her, on the shore, Ethan's body lay still. By morning, the rain had ceased, leaving the village wrapped in a damp, uneasy stillness. The river, once wild and roaring, now moved sluggishly under a gray dawn sky. Police tape fluttered along the embankment, cordoning off the stretch of mud where the tragedy had unfolded. Curious onlookers whispered from behind the barricades, their murmurs carrying fragments of speculation. Murder, jealousy, revenge. Inspector Dela Cruz stood at the edge of the water, his boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. He had seen his share of blood before, but something about this case unsettled him. The bodies told a story that didn't quite fit together. Ethan's corpse had been found first, half submerged near the reeds, a gunshot wound to the chest. Victor's body had surfaced hours later downstream, his skull fractured from an apparent fall against the rocks. And Lena was gone. He lit a cigarette, watching the thin trail of smoke coil upward into the humid air. "You're sure no one saw her?" he asked one of the officers. "No, sir," the young man replied. "Neighbors heard gunshots around midnight, but by the time they came out, only the car was left. No sign of Mrs. Almeida." Dela Cruz exhaled slowly. "People don't just vanish." The officer hesitated. "There's something else. We found this in the glove compartment. He handed over a damp envelope, the ink smeared but legible enough. Inside was a photograph. Lena, standing beside Victor at their wedding reception, her smile wide, but her eyes distant. On the back, someone had written in a shaky hand, "Freedom has a price." The inspector studied the words, frowning. "Have forensics check the handwriting, and search the shoreline again. If she's alive, she won't have gone far." By noon, the investigation spread beyond the village. Reporters arrived, their cameras flashing as they pushed for statements. "Was it a crime of passion?" one shouted. "Did the wife kill them both?" another asked. Dela Cruz ignored them, retreating to his car where the files lay scattered across the seat. The facts didn't align neatly. Lena's passport was missing, her personal belongings gone. No trace of forced entry at the mansion. No clear evidence of who fired the gun first. He opened Victor's phone logs. The last call made was to a number saved simply as lawyer. Minutes later, a message had been sent to Lena's phone. "We need to talk. Tonight." After that, nothing. That evening, the coroner's report arrived. Ethan's wound was from a .45 caliber pistol, Victor's registered weapon. But Victor's own injuries suggested a fall, not a bullet. "So she pushed him," Dela Cruz murmured. "Self-defense or revenge?" He looked again at the photograph, tracing the faint outline of Lena's face with his thumb. Something about her expression struck him, the kind of sadness that precedes desperation. She hadn't looked like a killer. She'd looked like someone trying to disappear. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, staining the river gold. For a fleeting moment, Dela Cruz thought he saw movement on the far bank, a figure in a dark cloak slipping through the reeds. When he blinked, it was gone. "Sir," the officer called from behind him. "We've got a report from the next province. A fisherman claims he saw a woman walking near the ferry docks at dawn. Matches the wife's description." Dela Cruz crushed his cigarette into the mud. "Tell them to hold her if they find her," he said quietly. "She's the only one left who knows the truth." He turned back toward the river, the water glinting faintly in the fading light. Somewhere out there, he knew, the story wasn't finished. The sun rose pale over the provincial docks, casting long shadows across the water. A thin mist clung to the shoreline, curling around the moored fishing boats like smoke. Inspector Dela Cruz stood beside one of them, his coat collar turned up against the morning chill. A message had come through at dawn. The woman seen near the ferry was found. She was alive. When he entered the small clinic on the outskirts of town, the scent of antiseptic and rain filled the air. Lena sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her wrists bandaged, her hair tangled and damp. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, but her posture remained unnervingly calm. She didn't look like a fugitive or a murderer. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running. "You've caused quite a stir," Dela Cruz said quietly, pulling up a chair. "They're calling it a love triangle gone wrong. A jealous wife, 2 dead men, but I think it's more complicated than that, isn't it?" Lena didn't answer. She stared at her reflection in the small window, watching the light shift across the glass. "I need to know what happened by the river," he continued. "We found Victor's gun, his prints, yours too, and Ethan's blood on your clothes. You can make this easier for yourself if you tell me everything." Her lips trembled slightly. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." She closed her eyes. The words came slowly, like she was peeling open wounds that hadn't healed. "Victor didn't love me. He owned me. From the moment we married, he made sure I never forgot that. He said everything I had, even my breath, belonged to him." She paused, her hands tightening around the blanket. "Ethan wasn't supposed to come back. I told him to stay away. But he said he'd rather die than leave me with Victor." Dela Cruz listened, taking notes. Her tone was detached, almost fragile. When I met Ethan at the pier, she continued, I thought that we could finally escape. But Victor found us. He followed. He fired first. At Ethan. I tried to pull him away, but he kept shooting. I grabbed the gun. I didn't think. I just reacted. Her voice broke. He fell. The river took him. Silence filled the room. The ticking of the wall clock felt unbearably loud. After that, she said, I tried to save Ethan, but it was too late. I didn't want to run, but I couldn't face the headlines. Wife kills husband and lover. They'd never believe the truth. Dela Cruz studied her for a long moment. And what is the truth, Mrs. Almeida? She met his gaze, her eyes steady. That none of this was love? It was survival. Outside, a commotion stirred. Reporters gathering, police vehicles idling. The inspector stood, pocketing his notepad. The court will decide what to call it, he said. But either way, your life as you knew it is over. As he turned to leave, Lena spoke again, her voice low. You think it's over, Inspector? Look closer at the river. He frowned. What do you mean? She didn't reply, only smiled faintly, a haunted curve of the lips. Hours later, as divers returned to search the waters once more, they found something wedged beneath the rocks near the old pier. A phone sealed in a waterproof pouch. Inside were recordings, messages Victor had made, evidence of threats, blackmail, and his plans to deal with Ethan permanently. When Dela Cruz replayed the final message, Victor's voice echoed cold through the room. If she thinks she can leave me, she's mistaken. I'll make sure she never breathes another man's name again. The inspector leaned back, the truth finally unfurling before him like a bruise rising to the surface. And yet, as he closed the file that night, one question still lingered. If Victor was truly dead, why had no one found his wedding ring? The river was quieter now, almost serene, as if the chaos it had witnessed had been washed away by time. Yet Inspector Dela Cruz knew that water never truly forgot. It only buried what it could not cleanse. The divers were back that morning, their wetsuits glistening in the thin sunlight as they prepared for another search. Lena's revelation and the phone they'd recovered had reopened the case, not as a murder of passion, but as something far darker. He stood on the bank, watching the slow ripple of the current. Check near the south bend, he ordered. That's where the rocks form a drop. Anything heavy would have settled there. For hours they combed the depths, pulling up debris, branches, an old tire, scraps of fabric, but nothing significant. Until one diver surfaced suddenly, waving frantically. Sir, we found something! Dela Cruz rushed forward as they lifted the object from the water, a silver band, glinting faintly beneath a coating of silt. It was Victor Almeida's wedding ring, unmistakable even beneath the grime, engraved with the words, Forever Mine. The inspector stared at it, unease curling in his chest. The divers looked at each other, uncertain. So it's confirmed, then? One asked. He's gone for good? But Dela Cruz wasn't so sure. Rings don't surface by themselves, he murmured. Later that day, he returned to the clinic to inform Lena. She sat by the window, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. When he showed her the ring, her expression barely changed. They found it near the south bend, he said quietly. It's over now. She studied the ring for a long moment before whispering, No, Inspector. The river doesn't give back what it's done with. If it returned this, it's a warning. Her voice carried a chill that unsettled him. A warning? She turned to him, her eyes hollow yet sharp. Victor never believed in endings. He believed in sea. On troll. If you think death could take that from him, you didn't know the man I married. That night, Dela Cruz sat in his office going over the evidence again. Every photo, Every report, every testimony. Something about the ring's sudden appearance gnawed at him. The currents weren't strong enough to move it so far downstream. Someone had to have placed it there, recently, but who? Around midnight, a call came through from one of the patrol officers stationed near the river. The man sounded shaken. "Sir, we found something else. You'd better come." When Dela Cruz arrived, the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness. The officer pointed toward the shallows. There, half buried in the mud, was a single black leather glove. He bent to pick it up, noting the initials embossed on the inside. V.A. A cold breeze swept across the water, stirring ripples that shimmered like whispers in the dark. For the first time, Dela Cruz felt something he couldn't explain, a sense that the case wasn't simply unfinished, but alive. The following morning, when he went to question Lena again, her hospital room was empty. The bed was unmade, the window open. On the nightstand lay a small note written in her delicate script. "You were right. The river remembers. And so do I." Dela Cruz stood there for a long while, the paper trembling in his hand as the wind carried the faint scent of rain from the river. He didn't chase her. Somehow he understood that whatever justice remained would not be found in the courts, but in the water that kept their secrets. And outside, beyond the mist, the river flowed on, slow, endless, and knowing.